Hey guys, post-production Andrew here. Just wanted to give you an update on what you can expect. So today we had on Christopher Ashburn. He is the Vice President of Cash Management at Incredible Bank, which is a Wisconsin-based bank. It's heavy in the UP. It's a national bank as well, but it is a Wisconsin-based bank. We talked about kind of the advantages of working for a smaller bank versus a bigger bank. We talked about relationships, kind of what you can expect, having a new kid, whether or not college is worth it, and being a musician and how it affected Chris in business. Looking forward to the episode and enjoy. So, Chris, I wanted to start off just everything with you got a promotion recently to Vice President of Cash Management at Incredible Bank. So, talk to me about your role, what's different from your U.S. bank role, kind of how that came about.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So in my previous role, I was doing small business lending. I was a small business banker. So I kind of did a lot of different things. I did a little cash management. I did, deposit accounts. Lending was the lion's share of it. I would talk to customers about merchant services, basically across the board, whatever their business needs were. I would try and be the liaison between that person and whoever the expert was. Now in my new role, I am kind of the touch point for anything cash management related. There's no, revenue silo like I had in my last role. I was dealing with only businesses that made a certain amount of money, up to a certain amount of money. That's gone away now. And basically what my role consists of now is analyzing a business's deposit accounts and the way they move their money and looking for ways to gain efficiency. So whether that's either moving their money faster, easier, more conveniently, safer, whatever that is, whatever's important to them, finding the best ways to do that.
So you said you travel a lot. How does that work with this? Because you said primarily analysis. How does that work?
Yeah. So, a lot of it's just showing face. I think that, such a big part of any business to business sales job is building relationships. So being able to show face with your customers is a big part of it. The analysis portion I can do kind of on my own, but it's a relationship management position. And so we're one of the first community banks to offer national services. And so we have customers all over the U.S. We have customers in Colorado, in Nevada, California. We have a branch that we just opened down in Florida. And then we're actually headquartered right in Wausau. And so obviously we're local as well. So we have a huge presence here in the community in central Wisconsin. And so that just involves, a lot of travel. A lot of the times I'll get a call from maybe someone in a branch that's not nearby saying, I have a prospect I want to work with. I want to see what we can do for them on their deposit side to make us the most competitive. And so at that point, it's just kind of getting their statements, looking at what they have already, saying, well, they're paying too much for this, or they're not making enough money here, and then showing them ways where they can do that.
Absolutely. So just taking a look at things and kind of being like, hey, this is what we can work on.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are you looking at for that respect? What specifically, when you look at a statement, you're like, hey, this is a red flag, this is a green flag, what?
100%. Yeah. So a couple things that I look at are the ways that they move their money around. So a lot of places, haven't looked at the ways they make deposits in a decade, or they haven't looked at the way that they pay their employees in a decade. And so a lot of it's just updating them on technology and ways to make things easier for them. But a big part of it now, and this is kind of a shift that's happened in banking over the last maybe 5 years, with rates rising. One thing that's happened along with that is deposit rates are going up as well. And another thing that's gone up with that are earning credit tiers. And usually that's something that, high checking balance customers are going to be more familiar with. But essentially that plays into what's called an analyzed checking account. So basically what I'm doing is if I have a customer that has a high balance in their checking account, I'll look at their transactions down to how many deposits are they running, how many of those deposits include checks from other institutions versus checks from our institution, how many electronic debits do they have going out, and all those things run into a calculation that tells me a balance that they would ideally want to keep in their account to avoid fees for certain products and services that we would normally charge for. And so it's really the finding ways for the business customer to pay for those services with their balance rather than having to pay what we call a hard charge directly out of their account.
Okay. Okay. Would you say, like, what's the average amount that you'd say you see in businesses? Like, what, I wouldn't say average amount, but like, what percentage would you say, I know no statistics, I know nothing what's going on in my bank account? What percentage should I keep in there that you would say this is a safe amount of my monthly reoccurring revenue?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And that's going to be really, really highly dependent on the activity that you have within that account, because some people are going to only need a $5,000 cushion. Some people are going to need a much larger cushion, so it's really dependent on how the business runs. I would say for most commercial entities, we see them keeping more in their checking account because it's a way for them to, one, keep cash liquid when they need it if something happens. So it's, planning for, any situation, but it's also, keeping balances in that checking account is the way that they're offsetting fees. So it's the way that they're avoiding paying for services that maybe somebody who doesn't keep as much in their checking account is paying for.
Absolutely. I wanted to also ask you about, you switched from US Bank to Incredible Bank.
I did.
And US Bank, from what I know, is significantly larger than Incredible Bank.
It is. Yeah.
What would you say?
Larger.
What are the differences? Like what?
Yeah, I think the most attractive thing for me from moving from a larger institution to somewhere that's more localized, extremely localized. I mean, with Incredible Bank, the thing that I really liked is everyone that runs that business, every decision maker within that business is housed in the same place that I'm housed in. And it's a lot easier for me to make a common sense decision and get an exception made and make something special happen for a customer within a short time period than it was working for a larger institution. I feel like, if I needed something done that was outside of the norm in my last institution, I was asking for exceptions for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then most of the time I was getting a no back. Here, if we need something special done for a customer, I make a phone call and it's like a couple day turnaround time. It's done. And that is, it's art in motion watching that happen. It's really great being able to do that.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's definitely really rewarding when you can look them in the eyes and just be like, we got it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, it's definitely, knowing that you're able to kind of make comprehensive packages or make something out of the norm happen is a very, very rewarding feeling. And it's, it's a lot less stressful than running into a situation where you can't and then having to go back to that person and be like, hey, I know we talked about this. We're not going to be able to do it, because the people who make that decision don't ever talk to your customer most of the time. So it's a lot better being able to, like I said, have those people close to the customer.
Yeah, I know for me, being in websites, we do everything custom. So if you need to pay over the course of like 18 months or 24 months or whatever, right, we have that ability because we know that you're going to pay it, but we also don't have to force you the upfront cost. Whereas if you were like a bigger website developer, it's always the upfront cost. Like you have to pay it. There's no exceptions and there's basically nothing you can do.
Absolutely.
So it's really nice to have that flexibility and be like, we're working with you and we're doing our best and doing what's best for you. Because then A, the customer's happier because you're helping them out. B, you feel better about it because then you know that you're giving a better product or service for them that's more tailored to them in a sense. 100%. And so you get the benefits on both sides. But larger institutions, you can't do that as much.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like most businesses, no matter what the industry is, I feel like most businesses, once you reach a certain size, some of that goes out the window. And I think the businesses that win most and the businesses that you see around the longest are the businesses that really don't forget about that. You know what I mean? And they keep their customer first.
Yeah. It didn't sound like there was a lot of leeway room in US Bank, but could you make some of those decisions as well? Or was it very like strict, tight, this is how it has to be?
I mean, so one, I did not make any of those decisions at US Bank. If I needed an exception made, I was not the guy who made those calls. So that went up the ladder. Were there instances in which there were exceptions made? Yes. I think that the spectrum of ability was a lot smaller. I think that there were definitely a lot more check boxes that you had to mark before they were going to make an exception. Whereas I think that the place I'm at now, not that we're just throwing money out the window by any means, or just doing things that don't make sense, but I think that, like I said, it gives us the ability to do, I call it common sense banking. When something makes sense for everyone and a policy is holding us back and there's no legal risk, there's no, real risk, it's a lot easier to work around that policy.
I would say the one downfall of that, though, is with the flexibility comes significantly more risk in the sense of it's not always something that's going to work out, because 9 times out of 10 it's something new. Would you say that's the case, or would you say it's less than you'd think?
It's dependent. I think that in most instances it would be less than you think, because I don't think that it's not like there's not anyone looking at it and judging that risk. We have a compliance team that looks at everything. We have a risk team that looks at everything. But I think you'd be surprised at the amount of things, especially in banking, that you can't do because of a technicality that really doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. And so when you run into those instances where there's really not risk, you're just being held up because of a rule that's old and has never been updated, or because of, something where the situation has changed in the last 10 years. You run into a lot of those situations. And so it pays to be able to kind of work around them.
Yeah. What would you say is the biggest rule that you have issues with? I wouldn't say like you personally have issues with, but you run into issues with when you're working with clients.
In banking in general, I would say there is a lot of issue around things like access and how you access things. So for instance, if you have a certain type of credit card, you can only look at it through your online banking one way. And that's just because it's the way it was built. And there's other ways to do it, but because you're this type of customer, you're only allowed to look at it that way. And so there's a ton of instances like that where there's ways to make things more convenient for a customer, and banks just aren't doing it because that's just the way it is, and no one wants to make that change. So I would say things like that are probably the most common, or at least for me, they're the things that kind of like most irk me. I see reason behind requiring a business to be in business for a certain amount of time before you lend them money. I see reason behind requiring a balance to get a certain rate, things like that. But I don't see reason to make something more difficult for a customer, because that's just the way it is when you have all of the ability to change it,
Yeah. Okay, so I actually have an interesting question. So let's say we're talking about a social media marketing company who has relatively stable reoccurring revenue, right? They're charging the monthly service and they know this is how much is going to come in next month. And they've only been in business for like year and a half. Mm-hmm. But the hard limit is, I don't know, what is the hard limit for years in business if you're trying to get a decent sized loan?
It depends, but most institutions they're going to require 2 years in business before they look at you for lending, unless it's, sometimes there's exceptions with like SBA lending and things like that, but a lot of the times they'll require 2 years in business.
So would you even look at a company like that, despite the fact that they have this really stable reoccurring revenue that they can pay it?
Yeah, so it depends on the institution, and mm-hmm. Without getting into specifics, because I'll be clear in saying that I am not a lender right now. So for me to say that yes, I would look at that, or yes, I wouldn't, or no, I wouldn't look at that, that wouldn't make sense, because I'm not the person who looks at that. But I would say depending on the institution and depending on the banker, right? In my opinion, a good banker is going to look at everything. You know what I mean? There's never going to be a situation where someone's going to bring me their financials and say, I want a loan. And I'm going to say, how long have you been in business? If they tell me less than 2 years, I'm going to say, get out of here. That does not make sense. Mm-hmm. And that's not a sign of a good banker. So if there's a banker doing that to you, or anyone out there, I would say, shop around for your bankers, find someone who's really going to look at your stuff. Because for me, I think it makes sense to at least explore every option. I was always taught in banking to never make no the final answer. It's always no, and here's what we can do to change that. And so, I think a good banker would always look at that situation and explore all the options that are out there. I've also seen some crazy Hail Mary loans go out the door that I personally thought, oh, man, maybe this might not happen, and then it goes through. So that's always a great feeling too.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I'm gonna have to start looking at loans for like housing and stuff because I'm getting to that age where I probably should start buying things if I want to get into real estate investing. So I know I was looking at loans and talking to people just kind of get ahead of the game and figure out what's going on. And one consensus that I found from basically half the real estate agents I've talked to is talk to the smaller banks. They'll do a better job of finding something that works for you.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think that more localized outfits, like I said, they tend to have more ability to make things comprehensive and kind of customize things for the person they're working with. Whereas, yeah, I mean, if you're working with a huge mortgage lending bank that does tons of mortgages every single week, they're probably not going to care if they don't get one mortgage. And so they're
Yeah.
looking for really, really prime situations, whereas smaller banks are going to understand, if there's something happening, they're going to understand the situation and a way to work around it most of the time.
Yeah. I know Josh was a huge advocate of this when I was talking to him. Josh from Next Home.
Oh,
And
yeah.
his favorite bank was Pineries. I think it's partly just because it's literally right across the street from him.
Yeah.
But he was like, yeah, I mean, they're one of the best banks because they won't look at your income. They'll look at the business's statements and how much you could be making as income.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's a really big thing for entrepreneurs.
Right. And yeah, that's a huge plus. And I'll say every bank probably does their underwriting a little differently, but there's certain banks that actually underwrite their own loans in house. So like their bankers will actually underwrite the loan. And that's a plus too if you're finding yourself getting trouble, lending conventionally under, regular underwriting terms.
Yeah.
I will say you're in a tough spot to start doing residential lending right now.
Yeah.
I mean, timing wise, it's not ideal, but it's a fluid number, so it'll change.
I mean, the market's starting to get better,
Mm-hmm.
kinda.
Yeah, kind of. Things are slowing down a little bit. You see it. The rates are starting to drop a little bit, so we'll see where it goes. Definitely, but I think that if we've ever been in uncharted territory, it's now. So everyone's kind of on their toes, waiting to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, I see. There's like half the real estate agents in my LinkedIn feed are like, I just sold 5 more houses, and the other half are like, I'm drowning, please help.
Yeah.
So it's really like, it's a rough spot right now. It's
Yeah.
really a rough spot.
I think especially for real estate agents, you kind of have to find a niche market to work in right now. It's not like it was, in 2020, 2021, where you just had people just beating down your door to buy houses and everyone was kind of flooding into this market of property management. And, there were, I think, real estate investment businesses popping up every third day just to get in while the rate was low.
I know one thing that I think is coming back, especially in real estate, is a very like a personable realtor. Like Amy Lesniak from the Legacy Group. It's a really small, I want to say 4 or 5 realtors that just all work together.
Oh, sure.
She has a very personable brand of her brand is her.
Yeah.
Like she will do everything she can for you. She will try to help you out. And that's how it is. And she seems to be doing really well. So having that brand of I'm here, I'm one of you seems to be doing really well.
Yeah, and I think that I think a lot of industries are coming back to that. I think that obviously that went away during the pandemic. Everything was hands off, everything was digital, and that was really the focus. Nobody was really focused on making touch, but you see that everywhere. I actually go back and visit some of my old colleagues at some of the other banks that I've worked at in the past, U.S. and a couple other ones, and it's funny because working for a smaller outfit, they're always really focused on getting out, being involved in the community, going and visiting your businesses. And that's kind of always how Incredible Bank's been. When I first came into US Bank, it was December of 2020. And so it was like the height of the pandemic scare, and no one was going out and visiting anybody. And it stayed that way for a long time. Well, it's funny because now when I go back and I talk to some of my old colleagues and I talk to them about some of the expectations that they have, or some of the changes that have happened since I've left, one of the things that they're doing now is even these big banks are starting to incentivize their bankers that have traditionally just been in the branch to open accounts and run transactions to get out in the community and go do flyer drops, or go buy cookies and drop them off at 3 businesses and start to do these touches. So you see this on a macro level kind of across the business world as a whole. I think businesses are starting to shift their focus back to, okay, now we have to start creating those personal touches again, which I love to see. Pandemic was tough for me.
It's everywhere. I mean, that's part of the reason podcasts are coming back, I think.
Yeah.
Because you saw this really big uptick in podcasts, including this one, of like people who are doing something that's more authentic. Whereas like the Instagram reels, the TikToks are all hyper processed. Mm-hmm. Whereas this is very personal.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
you get some of the outtakes and things like that. Yeah. 100%. I think that authenticity is selling a lot more than it ever has. So yeah, I agree with you.
Speaking of personal, Chris, you had a kid in the last year.
I did. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, I honestly, I just wanted to ask kind of like what's changed? Like, what are your struggles?
So much has changed. Everything changes when you have a kid, right? So, I mean, it was something that we were well prepared for. I'm just naturally kind of neurotic person. So when I found out my wife was pregnant, it was like go time from the day we found out. I was prepping with, building a nursery and getting everything ready. We were stockpiling baby supplies from the moment we found out. And so that was really helpful in the long run, just to help calm a lot of my anxiety around becoming a father for the first time. But yeah, nothing can really prepare you for what, when that change actually occurs. It's such a shift in everything you do on a daily basis and just your thought process through everything. You consider this new person now in every single aspect of your life. And, it's easy to be selfish when you don't have that person there. And it's nice to be able to be selfish sometimes as well, but yeah, it's definitely a shift. You absolutely lose that. And your main focus just becomes creating safety around this human. And it's a big helpless feeling too. I don't think a lot of people touch on that, but it's a very helpless feeling being a parent, especially when things don't go as planned. I don't know if I told you this just in conversation or in passing at all, but there were a couple medical issues that we had with Beck right after he was, well, not right after, when we started feeding him purees, we found out that he has a food allergy. And so he has a condition called FPIES, which is a delayed food allergy. And he has trigger foods that are peanuts and eggs and corn and things like that. And we didn't know that. So we had a really scary episode. We had to call 911. An ambulance had to come pick him up and bring him to the hospital. And it was just an absolute terror. And throughout all of that, it's like you really realize how much you are not the expert when stuff like that happens, and how much you have to rely on and trust other people. And so that's something that I was not used to doing. Big shift, but it's been crazy.
One of the other things that I think people realize with having a kid, and on the same note with like the medical issues, is people are fragile. Like, you have no idea. I think every single teenager, every single person in probably their early 20s is like, I'm invincible. I can go hop on a motorbike and go like 140 down the freeway.
Yeah.
But then you get to that age and you start seeing these kids and you're like, oh, I'm just one of those grown up. I'm just as fragile.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it's a huge realization.
Yeah. 100%.
Huge one.
I think that's something oh, go ahead, please.
No. You can go.
I was just going to say, I think that's something that I started to realize in my middle age, I would say. When I got out of my 20s, for sure, I started to realize that some of the things that I used to do when I was younger that didn't scare me at all now terrified me. Like, I'm a lot more jumpy in a car. I'm a lot more of a careful driver now, especially now that I have, a backseat passenger. I used to make fun of my mom all the time for driving slowly. And now I'm so much worse than she is in a car. And I'm so much more panicky. If I see someone like start to go at a stop sign, I'm already in panic mode, slamming on my brakes. And that's one of the things definitely that kind of drove that exact point home for me is, some of the things that I used to do that never scared me before now are just terrifying to think about,
Yeah. It's so weird. Like, just seeing people have kids and you're like, oh, like that's That's interesting. Never would have thought that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to ask you as well. A lot of parents or newer parents say that they want to use a different parenting style than what like their parents did. So just a statistic for you. 44% of new parents say that they want to use just a somewhat different style from what their parents did. 43% say they want to use a very similar or somewhat similar. And 12% say that they're indifferent. So where would you say you fall on there, and what parenting styles are working for you thus far?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. That's a tough question for me. I don't know exactly how to answer that. I would say there's definitely some things that I would do differently from what my parents did, and some parenting styles that I would change for sure. I come from a split family, so I had a parent that lived in Chicago and a parent that lived in Michigan, and so that in itself created chaos, and I don't think that my parents necessarily got along very well until I was an adult. And so that created chaos as well. And so I don't think that, as far as parenting styles, I don't really remember one parent being more hands-on or more hands-off than the other or things like that. But I think that my focus is just on creating a calm environment for our child. And I think that the reason that is such a focus is maybe because of some of the things that I took away from my childhood. And I think that's the case with everyone. I think that if you ask anyone, why they parent the way they do, it's going to be based on, in some capacity, the way that they were raised. I think that's just impossible to get away from.
Yeah. I had no idea your parents were split. Mine are too. And so I don't know, are we super qualified for this? Or?
I'm just certainly not an expert. That's for sure. I think my parents, I don't think were married when I was born. And so they were married for a very short period of time, like maybe like a year and a half or 2 years, something like that. And then they divorced again. Or split, and then they actually got back together when I was maybe like 10, something like that. They were together for a couple years, and then they split again. And so it was kind of an on-off situation. But yeah, they were only married for a very, very short period of time.
Okay, interesting. I know my parents split when I was 3, I want to say. But my dad was always traveling for work, so it's not like he was ever in the house.
Sure.
So it's a really interesting thing talking to people who have had similar family situations of your parents split and they're all over, because they're all different, because it's so far from or at least it's becoming more normal, but it was so far from the norm. No one had any idea what to do.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I think that, I almost appreciated that my parents got split when I was younger, because I saw some of my friends when we were in high school, and I had two friends come to mind in this exact situation where they graduated from high school, and it was like their parents, within weeks after graduating, were like, all right, he's 18 now, it's time, we can get divorced. And they split right after that. And that was so much more of a traumatic situation, because not only was that person as an adult now dealing with their parents divorcing, but also dealing with the realization that what they thought was always this great foundation of a marriage, and the idea that they had of love and a strong marriage, was really probably not as strong as they thought. And that is, I think, foundation shaking. You know what I mean? That is, I think, rattling for someone coming into adulthood.
I agree. It's also really interesting because having someone so both of our parents were divorced young, but it's really interesting to see the fact that you can compare and contrast your parents as well when you're young. Yeah. Because you see, let's say one of your parents gets remarried, right? You can see what worked in this relationship and contrast it to what didn't work in the previous relationship. And so you see all of these different contrasts, what works, what doesn't. Whereas in the situation where you're saying you have this conception of a marriage that doesn't work, and now everything is just gone.
Right.
Your mind's blown.
Yeah. I think that's harder for a child, definitely. I can't imagine. I was lucky that, not lucky, I would say, but I was in a situation where I was old enough to understand and appreciate that both of my parents wanted companionship by the time that they were going and seeking other relationships. So that was kind of easier for me to process. I can't imagine being a 6-year-old and trying to do that. That's probably very, very hard to do. But with that, I think you gain a lot more insight. So by the time you're an adult, you probably have a lot more understanding than someone who has never gone through a relationship. I mean, you see these people who are 17 years old in high school and they're dating someone and they're like, yep, I'm done. I found the one. This is it. I already got it figured out. And it's like, you're going to be shook in like 2 years. Your heart is going to be broken. You know what I mean? So it's probably a lot tougher for that type of person to go through that breakup than it is for someone who's probably seen it a couple times and has been around the block.
I agree. I 100% agree. One thing that I also see is interesting that I would say when you're dating and you're younger, you can almost morph yourself to the other person's needs, right? So if you, let's say you're dating someone and they're a really anxious person. If you're more calm, you can lean into the calmness and balance each other out.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't even say teenagers as well, because like early 20s, you can have that too into like your late 20s. But as you start to get like 30, 35, you start to solidify. And so just being able to become the person that's best for your partner is also extremely important.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's interesting too that you say that, because it brings up the point of, is that us finding out more about ourselves and what we want and what we need, or is that us losing an ability to give someone else what they need? So it's kind of a combination, I think, of just us as humans becoming more rigid in older age and just saying, well, I'm not going to do that. I've put in my time. But also, I think it's, like you said, it's us solidifying around what we want and what we require for a relationship. And I think it becomes harder in older age to find compatibility, because I think there's, both sides are a little more strict around what they want.
Yeah. One of the best quotes on a relatively similar note, I can't remember who said it, but it's unsaid or unwritten expectations are premeditated resentments. And it's the exact same thing in a relationship.
Yeah.
Like when you're young, not knowing, and like your first relationship, you're not going to know what you need in a relationship because you've never had it before, right? It's a new experience.
Right.
And so as you go into your next relationship, you're like, this is what I need. Like, can you help me with this? And it's a giving thing in a relationship. And then the other person can go, yes, like I can do this. This is what I can help with. Maybe this isn't the best thing. We'll need to work around this. But it's learning how to function in a relationship as well.
Right. Well, and it's learning to dip your toes in too and move slower. I think that every teenager has been in love within a week, So I think that it's learning to kind of test the waters before you throw your whole heart into a situation or your whole self into a situation and all your energy and all your time, making sure that it's going to give you back what you need.
Exactly. I know, bringing it back to having a kid, how is this I know having a kid can shake up relationships and shake up work. How are you balancing all this? Like, how are you balancing a relationship, having your kid, going to work, all of this?
It is a circus juggling act. Yeah. I'm really, really lucky. My wife is very, very supportive. She's a therapist, so she understands, how to help people emotionally. So I think that when I get overwhelmed with things, which happens often, I go from hot to cold really easily, where if I don't have a lot going on, I become very bored and I fill up my plate really quickly, which is how Toon Tots came about. And if I have a lot going on, I become overwhelmed pretty easily as well. And so it's kind of a tough back and forth, and she helps me balance that very well. Throw a kid into the mix. I think when I first had my child, I did a really good job of halting every project that I had by the time he was born, because I knew that I wanted that to be my main focus. And so that was fantastic. And taking time off of work and being able to spend that 3 months with him was awesome, because I had nothing else going on. So it's like, this is my only focus. And I got to kind of slowly add things back in, which was very, very helpful. But I found even when I went back to work for the first time, especially going into a new career and a new role that I wasn't exactly familiar with, there were a couple weeks there where I was like, I don't know if I'm going to make it through this one. This is a tough one.
Yeah, it's got to be a lot. I can't imagine how much stress that is.
It's a lot. It's definitely a lot. I think that, like I said, my wife and I are closer than we've ever been. I think this was something that, parenthood was something we both knew that we wanted, and we both kind of understood the assignment before we went into it. We knew it was going to be chaotic, and we kind of expected it to be chaotic, and we went into it with the mindset of, we have no idea what's going to happen, but we know that it's you and me against parenthood, against we always joke that it's her and I against the baby, like it's a versus. And I think that just helps us, when things get really, really hard and it's like, hey, I need you to do this. Well, I don't have time to do this. I need you to do it. Well, I don't have time either. It just helps us, remember like, hey, we're on the same team no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the best stories that I've also heard on that respect is from my girlfriend's parents. So her dad, one of the kids was being born, and her mom just had the kid. And a few weeks later was the anniversary, and he just forgot. He just completely forgot the anniversary. Mm-hmm. But they knew that it was something that they could make up to each other and go, listen, like, shit happens, but we're a team. And that's one of those things that really brings because people are either bonded by stress or they break apart by stress. And so that's one of those things of like, you need to frame it right. You really do.
Absolutely. And you need to be able to give grace. It sounds like that's a really, really great example of that guy's wife being able to just provide grace when he needed it. So yeah, I think that's a huge part of it, is just forgiveness and kind of understanding, like you said, understanding it's chaos. Things are going to get missed. People make mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Being forgiving is one of the best traits you can have.
100%. Yeah, and I think that goes across the board. I mean, that's true in business too. I mean, I can't tell you how many times when I first got started trying to build my book of business, going out and, hearing countless times as I'm at the door knocking on someone's door or walking into their business, I'm getting a text or a call saying like, hey, I got to cancel. No problem. It's about understanding that people have lives and things happen, and that's totally okay. And we're going to get together when we can, so I think that goes across the board.
Yeah, you have to work with people, because it's bringing it back to everyone's just a child in an adult body.
Yeah,
like everyone's gonna make mistakes. No one's perfect.
Absolutely.
I also wanted to ask you about being a musician. So I was stalking your Instagram.
Okay.
And I know you've written songs, quite a few. You're a co-owner of a recording studio.
Correct.
And you own Toon Tots.
Yes.
So, and for Toon Tots, you're the primary entertainer / musician. I don't really know
I'm the
how to phrase that, but
I'm the only member of the LLC. So,
and it's primarily for kids. So I know there's recordings on there. I'll also link it in the description for people who are interested in. So
appreciate
it's
that.
in there as well.
Yeah. So Toon Tots, Toon Tots is geared from kids 3 months old to around like maybe 6 or 7 years old. Older than that, usually they want to hear songs on the radio. We're doing a lot of like participatory songs. We hand out instruments for them to explore with and play. A lot of call and response, a lot of, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, getting them out there, getting them active, getting them dancing, socializing with other kids is a huge part of it. And getting an interest in music, I think, is the biggest mission.
Yeah. I know I see you play acoustic. When's the rock and roll coming?
It's a good question. That's a good question. That's a lot bigger of a production. So we actually had a kind of a larger show planned a couple Saturdays ago. We were playing. We were going to be playing for a cancer fundraiser. It's called Extra Innings. It's ran by Ted Harkey. If anyone wants to support a great cause, shout out Ted Harkey and Extra Innings. Go check him out. He raises money for cancer research locally right here in central Wisconsin, which is fantastic. And so I was playing for an event that he was putting on. Unfortunately, the weather made that impossible. But that was going to be kind of a bigger production where we got out some of the bells and whistles. We had a little bit of a light show planned. There's going to be some electric guitar and things like that. So when the situation calls for it, I'll be there with it. So.
Absolutely. The other one I wanted to talk on was your recording studio. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so High Freak Studios came in 2020 again, and Toon Tots is the same thing. Both of these were born out of boredom projects. So Toon Tots was, at right as I was ending my leave with my son. I didn't have a lot of projects going on. I thought I could probably throw one in there, and High Freak was born out of the pandemic. That was born in 2020. Again, when everything halted, we had a lot of extra time on our hands. We're like, how do we spend this time? High Freak is a pretty modest in-home recording studio that I run here with a partner of mine that lives in Michigan. And the way we work together is my partner, his name is Joe. He's kind of more of a silent partner. He helps consult. He does all the mastering. He's really the brains behind the studio. I have a fair amount of know-how, recording live sound myself. But when I have questions, I'm going to Joe because he's really the mastermind behind the project. I come in with things like sales, accounting, and then I do a fair amount of the recording legwork, before the mastering process. So most of the time when people come to record, they're actually sitting with me, recording their parts, getting my input. We do session work as well for people who might not have a guitarist or a drummer and they want those instruments. We can help with that. And yeah, we just kind of, same thing. We kind of make a comprehensive package based on whoever's coming in and what their budget is and what they want it to sound like, and do our best to bring that dream into a reality.
What's the hardest part of running the studio?
It's a good question. I would say the hardest part of running the studio is when it's getting people to understand the process of recording, and that you have to put a certain amount of time into it to get a certain result as an output. We see a lot of people come in and they say, oh, I can record my song in a couple hours. And so I only need to pay for a couple hours of studio time, and I want it mixed in a day and sent back to me. And it's like, we have to have that conversation up front of like, if you want that to happen, it's not going to be a quality product. Things like that take time. It takes you listening 1,000 times, and it takes as much from we need a customer or a client that is as passionate about the project as we are. Because if you get someone coming in and, excuse me, my language, but half-assing a project or coming in and kind of doing it halfway, it's disappointing for everyone. It's disappointing for them. It's very disappointing for me. So I think that's the biggest part of it. But with that, I don't think there's a lot of people who get to the point of wanting to spend money on a recording who aren't, at least to a certain level, passionate about it. So we don't run into that problem too often. It's just probably the most unsettling problem that we have.
Okay. Yeah. I know. Yeah. On the mastering thing, it takes ages. Like me and my friend have a grindcore, like a duo set, and grindcore is as raw as it comes. It takes us 2 days for a song.
Yeah. And that's a pretty quick
you basically
turnaround.
Don't master it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And I would assume you guys, for your drums, are you using like triggered drums?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that even takes a lot of the process out of it as well, because a lot of the stuff you're coming in as already as MIDI data, so you can kind of control it a lot more than if you're miking a drum set.
And you can also copy and paste stuff as well.
Yeah.
Especially when it's MIDI. Like you have to kind of be a little bit leeway because the tempo can go up and down and whatever, right?
Right.
But for the most part, you can copy and paste things. Like if you're a decent musician and you can somewhat stay on tempo, you're fine.
Yeah, you're
fine.
Your two good measures, and you're like, yep, I can recreate that over and over. Yeah, that's something that I've really learned over the past few years is ways to kind of blend the efficiency of using MIDI data with recording live sound, because I'm a live sound purist. That's really, I don't do a lot of music production. We've had one or two rap artists, but we've outsourced the beats and we just do the vocal recording. Really our expertise is on capturing live sound. And so that's a really tedious process, and it takes a long time, and it takes a certain, I would say, a certain perspective on the artist's end to want that type of result, because some people want a very process. You're never going to have a live recorded, metal band. It's just not going to happen. So some people or some genres that doesn't work for. So being able to kind of understand that and work kind of a more digital aspect into our recordings, especially with rock bands, has been very, very beneficial, without making it over processed. There's still some authenticity you want there. You want to be able to hear string slides, things like that. But yeah, I think that that's definitely a lesson that I've learned in the past couple of years is, let the technology do some of the work for you.
It's a really nice blend, especially if you know what you're doing, because you can make it sound really, really, really good and really, really on point, but you can also make it sound authentic. Like, leave some of the imperfections, like you said, leave some of the string slides, right? People really enjoy that. And some of the best songs are the live versions as well.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
it's authentic.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yep.
And that's what music is.
I think I've gotten away as a principle, even when I'm doing things like triggered drums, where I know I'm going to have this MIDI data that I'm pulling from a library for our drums. I'll still, even with bass, if I'm recording bass, I'll direct in a bass, but then I still mic it as well, because you get that. And if I want to hear if you step on a chord, I think that's cool. It might sound nice. And if it doesn't, we can take it out. You know what I mean? So I think there's I've gotten into dual recording a lot too. I'll direct in a guitar and mic it, and then just kind of blend those two things together, which has been really beneficial.
One of the things that I've also found really fun about music and being able to, your at-home recording and editing, is getting the really interesting samples. There's a couple bands that I'm like, why is there a Charlie Brown sample in here? This is a really heavy band. Why is Charlie Brown here?
Well, and you see how often that happens too, and you see on a large scale how much music gets recycled, depending on genre. But there's so often now that I hear a drum part in a song today, and it's that exact drum part is in 6 other songs dating all the way back from 2010 to 1976. You know what I mean? And it's it's the exact same drum part that they're playing. It hasn't been changed one bit. And so I don't remember who said this. Somebody at some point who was well known said this, but it stuck with me, and I'm probably misquoting it. But they said the best musicians don't create music, they steal music and then make it new. And that's really rang true for me, because there's only so many 4-chord progressions. There's only so many nasty riffs that someone's going to make. There's only so many drum fills you can do. Eventually you're going to have repeat. So finding ways to utilize those same tools in a new way, I think is really, really important in creating music.
I agree 100%. On that, I kind of want to circle back to just a little bit on business. What has music taught you in business? What has that really brought?
I think that music has definitely taught me the power of networking. I grew up in bar bands. I think I was in my first cover band when I was 14 or 15 years old, and we started playing a local bar circuit where I had to literally have either a parent show up, or I would have to have, sometimes my band teacher would show up. So there was and sometimes it was just begging bar owners to let me play. But that's how I really got started. And I was, even at that time, the driving force behind all of the booking. So when you have a 15-year-old calling a bar and I want to play there this weekend, that's a tough sell. You have to get good at networking and really selling yourself at that point. So I got a lot of practice hearing no. I got a lot of practice negotiating and overcoming objections. I got a lot of practice throwing out a large net, and creating connections, asking for referrals, things like that. And at the time, it's you don't even realize you're learning those things until you have to put them into practice elsewhere, and then you already know them. It was interesting for me when I first came into banking, and they were go out and leverage your personal relationships to find new business. And it's I do that. all the time. And you see some of these people who have, gone to college for finance and, coming out thinking they're going to know everything about banking. And then they get their first banking position and they don't know how to network and they really, really struggle. So I think that's something that gave me a huge leg up, just understanding that building quality relationships, people buy from who they like. Even if you have a subpar product, people are going to they will buy that product if they like you. If you have the best product in the world and that person does not like you, they're not going to buy your product.
Actually, you mentioned college there. I couldn't find college on your LinkedIn. Did you go to college?
I went to a semester of college for elementary level education. I was going to be a school teacher.
Okay.
Yeah. So didn't shake out that way.
What are your opinions on college then?
I mean, I think college is great. My wife she had her bachelor's degree when we first met. I actually was a huge encouragement to her to go back and get her master's degree when she was thinking of just not going back. I think it's fantastic for the right people. And if I had the option to go back when I was a teenager and decide that I was going to go to college and do it fully and get that done, I would probably want to do that. I don't think that it's required for everyone. I think that I'm blessed and I got very, very lucky where I'm in a position where I'm comfortable with the amount of money that I get paid and I'm in an industry and a career that I really enjoy and I don't have to pay student loans back. That's really, really lucky. That doesn't usually shake out that way. So I think that depending on the career path you want, you need college. But I think that it's becoming a lot more common to see people gain interest in having their own business, in doing things like, service work or trade work, electricians, plumbers, sheet metal workers, union workers, things like that. Those people have great career paths and you don't have to go to college for that. You have to just learn that industry. So I think that depending on what you want, college could be great. It might not be your thing. I certainly don't think that you should go to college for 4 years if you're not going to use it at all. Save the time, save the time, save the money.
That's one thing that I thought was really interesting. So I was talking to Kevin Newman. He's the dean at the Century School, which is the business school at UWSP. So I was talking to him. He's the associate dean. Anyways, whatever. I was talking to him. And one thing that I find interesting is, first off, just a statistic for you. The average amount that you pay for college has skyrocketed, but the median income coming out of college has only ever so slightly increased over the last, I think it was 20 years that they did the study.
That is sad, but it's not surprising.
Yeah, it is. But one of the things that he was saying is it's really important that you think about what you're going to do before you go into college, because taking on that debt without a plan to get rid of said debt is terrible for you.
It's an insane investment.
It's what? I want to say like $15,000 a semester, and then you have housing. You still have to pay for some food stuff. So think about it this way: $15,000, $30,000 a year. Multiply that by 4. That's $120,000 in student loan debts. Okay, now factor in the interest. You're probably paying back $250,000 over the course of your lifetime.
Easily.
Like, if you're not going to use that degree, that's $250,000 that you've lost.
Which, in my opinion, it's taken way too long to get to that mindset. I remember being in high school and having teachers tell me, like, oh, college is where you figure out what you're going to do. Like, you go to college to find out what you're interested in. Change majors 8 times. That's good. And now it's like, if I've earned credits on something and I've gone in and paid for something and gotten halfway there and then I'm going to change and I have to start out, like, who's suggesting that? That is bonkers. That's nuts. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that people have to have a big understanding of the investment that it takes to go to college. Not only the money, but the time and the effort and the space that it takes up in your life.
Yeah. You also have to think about that's 4 years that you could be working on something else. And life's short. 4 years is not trivial.
Yeah, that's no drop in the hat. That's a huge amount of, well, not a huge amount of time, but it's a significant amount of time for sure. And especially, I mean, like I said, I know plenty of people who have gone to college and have gotten out and they work as a chef, or they work building houses, or they work for highway construction companies. And it's like those people now are taking part of their hard-earned money and they're paying it back to someone who, I don't know. I would say not sold them snake oil. They learned something. They left with something, but it has nothing to do with anything that they want. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. It's really difficult to find what you're going to do. And even taking a gap year and finding that out is great.
Yeah, 100%.
So I tell you what, we're getting towards time here. So I just want to say, where can people find you? What socials you got? Where do you want to send people?
Yeah, Christopher Ashburn on my LinkedIn is probably the easiest one. Website for Tune Tots is tune, TUNE dash tots, TOTS.com, tune-tots.com. High Freak Studios on Instagram and Facebook, probably the easiest way to find us there. It's spelled HI Freak Studios. For any recording needs, anything like that. I do want to plug one thing. We also just started a new service with High Freak Studios. We're doing audio guest books for weddings and other events. So if you want people to call and leave messages, you can hear their voice as a part of that memory rather than having them write down a note to you in your guest book. It's something that we're offering through the studio now as well. Just want to push that. And I want to say thank you for letting me come on and chat with you, man. It's been a blast.
Absolutely. This is honestly one of the more fun podcast episodes because it feels very personal as well.
Yeah, I'm glad we got into some of the deep stuff. That's good.